Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Shut Up David series here on New View Safety Coach channel. Today, we've got a guest for you, and we were chatting about this the other day, and he said, look, there's not very many of us around in the world, and well, especially here in Australia, and I think that's because he's one of these unique people, a little bit like myself. He is that bridge between New View Safety and coaching. He's been around for a long time here in Australia, very well respected, very well known. If you haven't heard of him, I've got a brief intro to introduce him. However, likelihood is that you will have heard of him, but let's go with the intro anyway. So our guest today is Andrew Barrett. He's an accomplished safety coach and consultant dedicated to empower senior health and safety leaders and their teams. With a wealth of experience and a passion for driving positive change, Andrew's mission is to help these professionals become more relevant, valued, and effective within their organizations and operations. Three key components for Andrew there. In addition to his thought-provoking LinkedIn posts, Andrew hosts the Safety on Tap podcast, a dedicated resource for professionals developed. I'll get this right sometime. A dedicated resource for professional development in the field of health and safety. This free resource offers valuable conversations and insights to help professionals grow and excel in their roles. Andrew Barrett's a true asset to the health and safety community. We're thrilled to have him join us today to talk about communications in organizations and how organizations can learn from the front line, and coaching as well, overall coaching. So please welcome Andrew Barrett. Andrew, stumbled my way through that intro, mate.
You got there. I appreciate it. And if we're in a hurry, then maybe we'll miss something. So I appreciate the time with you.
No, we're not in a hurry. It's all good. I was just, I don't know what it was. Too many long words, I think what it was. But we had to do you justice for people who don't know you.
You're too kind.
And you know, you've got a lot of accomplishments, and you've, as I mentioned, you spend a lot of time here in Australia educating people about the benefits of coaching, talking about emerging safety contemporary methodologies, and you've been there at the forefront for what, 10, 15 years now? Is it here in Australia?
Well, it depends on how you measure it. So in terms of the work that I've been doing yesterday, I've been doing that for about 8 years, but as a health, safety and environmental professional who's reformed, there's no 8-step or 10-step or 12-step program to go through that. But anyway, I am reformed. Been doing that for close to 20.
Right. Okay. And when you say the work you did yesterday, what exactly was that work?
Well, I think the reason why I say the work I did yesterday is because it's useful for us to spend a little bit of time in the present to go, well, what am I actually doing today? How is it different from yesterday or the last year or 5 years ago? And then that helps us kind of think about the future too. So I tend to do this time anchoring thing. What I did yesterday was Sunday, so it's probably not a good literal example. But my work is around people like me. Trying to help people like me in roles like I was in as a senior health and safety person with the team, trying to make change in organizations and realizing that what we did last week is not actually going to help us next week. So that's kind of the work that I do. But it's more mission driven or goal driven rather than method or technique driven. So what that looks like has changed over time. And I think that's important to distinguish.
Right. Okay. So we had a chat last week, didn't we? And we were talking about where we wanted this conversation to go and we didn't want to script it too much because neither of us are script type of people. We just wanted to have a conversation. And you said to me, what would be of value to your listeners? And I said to you at the time, I said, look, there's a lot of conversation, very valid, just conversation as well around at the moment about how organizations can learn from their front line, how they defer to the expertise, how they learn about work as done as opposed to works imagined. However you want to frame it, it's that communication piece with the people at the sharp end doing the real work.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of people talking about it, and they're doing a lot of great things, but it's not always that easy to articulate.
Yep.
This is an area that you work very closely with your clients in as well. So I thought that might be a good starting point. We can talk about how you've seen that done. Some of the wins, some of the losses, some of the lessons that people have learned along the way.
Yeah.
Broad conversation to start off with, but why don't you tell me, well, why don't you tell the viewers and listeners what it means to you in order to be able to get that information from the front line where it's real time, where people are in the adaptive environment all the time. How important is that information?
Well, I think it depends. So in the first instance, we need to be really, really careful about not falling in love with an idea unless we're really clear about why we're doing it. So I'd like to begin by having the listeners kind of think to themselves, why is that important? Because it means different things to different people. I see more and more people, and they come to me and they say, I've fallen in love with... Actually, they don't say that. What they say is, I want to do learning teams. Or they say, we're now a 4D organization, or whatever it is. And I'm like shaking my head and kind of at the start going like, you're talking about the what, but we've totally missed the why.
Yeah.
So my work fundamentally lives in that liminal space between what we did yesterday and what we want to do tomorrow. The idea of liminality comes from rites of passage. It's a pretty ancient kind of word, which is how do we move?
I was going to say, I've never heard of it.
You've never heard of it. It's a beautiful way to describe, I think, what is the job that we're here to do. What were we yesterday? So let's think about rites of passage. I've got teenage kids, and so they're going through this rite of passage of I'm no longer a child, but I'm not quite an adult. They're in this liminal space, and that's not just called being a teenager. It's a really nuanced and complex idea about identity and gender and relationships and responsibility and money and all sorts of things, right? That's the liminal space. So I live in the liminal space. I help people go from where were we yesterday and then where are we going to go tomorrow. So that's a long answer to your question. The short answer to your question is well, why do we want to do that? And the reason why we want to do that for most organizations is because we realize that what we have been doing, what inputs we have been using for our risk assessments or what outputs we have been getting from our incident investigations haven't been giving us things of value. I'm not going to say giving us what we want, because we absolutely want to blame people and put them in a window seat or an aisle seat on when something goes wrong and it's time for them to leave the offshore platform. We certainly like big reports, and organizations like big reports and the sense of definitive answers of something really quickly, within 7 days, because that's what the system says. So we're doing lots of what we want, but we're actually not getting really what we need. So I think that's the starting point for us to say, well, why is it important to understand what's going on in the front line? I can riff more about learning, but I'm going to take a breath.
Right. Okay. So before organizations want to learn more, your takeaway from that is, why do you want to learn more? What is the underlying reason? What's the driver? What's the value you're looking for? And why is that different from what you were doing today or yesterday?
Yeah. Yep. So most stuff in organizations is done without clear explanation. So okay. Why do we... Have you heard the story about the lamb roast?
No.
Okay. So you're from England. I'm from Australia. Lamb is a big part of, our diet, especially the ritual of a Sunday dinner with the family. And so there's this lady who's got her mother in the kitchen, grandmother of her children, and one of the teenagers says, I want to help prepare this roast. This Sunday roast is a big deal for our family. And so they're getting things ready, the potatoes and the vegetables, and they get this leg of lamb and kind of trim the end of the leg of lamb off. And the granddaughter says, well, why do we do that? And the mother says, I don't know, we've always done that, and turns to the grandmother and says, why do we do that? She goes, well, I don't know either. She goes, maybe I should ask great granny in the nursing home. Anyway, so the next time grandma goes to visit great granny in the nursing home, and she says, we were having Sunday dinner, and why is it that we trim the end of the leg of lamb? And she goes, well, because I had a tiny oven when we got our first house. And so what happens is that we miss the why. The why just disappears in so much of what we do. And so I think it's actually really useful for us to slow our process down and ask why we're doing it. I think Dave Proven and Drew Ray's work and their colleagues on Safety Collider picks up on this idea, where we used to say, like literally 3 years ago, we used to say all of this stuff is for safety. And it was just this broad brush, like vague statement. But now we can actually say, well, we do this because it makes us feel better. And that's not the same thing as making safety better. We do this because we need to show someone else in the organization, whether it's an internal manager or senior leadership for assurance or a regulator. So that's called demonstrated safety. But that's not the same thing as actual safety. So their research helps us get clearer on the why. So it's not to say that those things are illegitimate. Dave Proven has said to me before, anything other than real safety stuff is illegitimate. I'm paraphrasing him, and I disagree. I think that they serve these socio-cultural purposes. Our job in the liminal space is to actually say, well, how do we engage people in the why without making them too uncomfortable and making them want to run away, so that they can explore a new why. So I think that that's the beginning of the conversation about why we need to learn from work as done.
Okay. I've got two questions come to mind when you've been saying that. Firstly is, how do you go about having those? And it may seem like an obvious question, but this is obviously you've got someone coming to you and they've seen a new toy, they've seen a new shiny thing that they really want and they want to be associated with. They've heard lots of things about it and they want it. So they're driven to have that. So how do you have those conversations with someone to talk about, those potentially sensitive areas of, have you actually sat down and thought about your why? How do you have those? And then on the flip side of that, what are some of the reactions you get from people when you have those conversations?
Yeah, so it depends on how you have the conversation. The scary bit in this liminal space is that in order for us to do it well, we have to have an idea about the way we think the conversation might go. And we have to be really, really prepared that the conversation is not going to go the way we want it to go, which means that we're in a space of uncertainty. Now, the underlying professional default behavior of people who work in health and safety is to reduce uncertainty. That's the definition of risk, is uncertainty against objectives. And so we don't even realize, well, it's like the fish swimming around in the water, and the older fish swims past and says, isn't this ocean beautiful today? And they're like, what's the ocean? Because they have no idea, because it's just all around them. So what we tend to do is we don't like uncertainty. So when we start a conversation where we don't exactly know how someone's going to respond, we run away from that. That's really scary. So at that point in time, our job is not actually to evaluate our success on the basis that our idea was right and we asked the right question, we got the right answer like a lawyer would do, but actually that we asked the right question in order to move the conversation forward. So if you come into your organization and you say, I want to do learning teams, you've skipped about 64 steps in the change process before you can actually, introduce a new idea, because you've had no empathy whatsoever for any of the status quo. And the reason why the status quo is the status quo is because it's really good at hanging around. Like that's it, right? So we have to respect the status quo, and we have to spend some time learning about the status quo before we get really excited about the new thing and buy a coffee mug and a t-shirt and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So again, explain the fact that people have to start from the status quo, have to start from a place of empathy.
Yeah.
How does that land? And I know you say it depends on how you approach it. You're essentially taking someone from step 74 and you're putting them back at step 1. That has to have some kind of emotive response from the people that you're talking to. Are they happy about that? Do they, when they realize that this is what they've done, are they happy that you're taking them back and saying, look, okay, let's start to figure out your why first?
Which they are you talking about? Which people?
General people.
Okay.
I don't have any specific people to talk about.
Okay, cool. So I work with senior health and safety leaders and their teams. That's kind of the change mechanism that I tend to support. I try to work in the background, behind the curtains, in the shadows, whispering in their ears and poking them in the belly and gently pushing them forward. That's kind of the people who I work with. So I might start with them as the who. So the biggest cause of resistance for change in health and safety is health and safety professionals. So that's the first thing. So what I need to do is to appreciate that when someone comes to me and says, I want to do learning teams, my immediate reaction is kind of to laugh I did that once or twice, and I worked out that was a really rude way to respond, because I was like dialing up my "I'm right," and what happened was is that inadvertently I dialed down the empathy piece. So we need to be a little bit more patient and kind with people and go, okay, so what's going on for you? So someone will say to me, for example, the other day, I put a call out on LinkedIn. I said, our community, our coaching community that we get together, we're going to spend a little bit of time in the next few months looking at designing our services. And we call that designer services. And the reason why we call that designer services is because our work is frequently disconnected in multiple ways. What that means is that if you have a whole team of people, that different members of the team are disconnected from each other in the sense that their work is not consistent and their service delivery is not consistent. Often we push safety people out into the edges of the organization. We don't have a sense of what it means to be in a team, apart from the fact that we have similar job titles. We're disconnected from operations. We're disconnected from the people in operations. Yep. We're disconnected from the life cycle of the organization. We're disconnected from its goals. So when we want to design these services, I want to bring people along into the conversation. That's what we do with our groups. And so when I put the call out there for people, and I say, hey, we're getting this group together. Do you want to come along? You send me a message. And then people I get this sense that people are surprised when I say to them, oh, I saw you wanted to come along to our thing. Why is that relevant for you? What's going on for you at the moment? Because I can't make any promises about my ability to help people unless I understand where they're coming from, unless I understand where they're at, their work as done.
Yep.
So I think that's kind of the starting point, which is to actually say, let's not get excited about all of the stuff we could do in the future. We're not rejecting it. But all we're doing is we're saying, let's spend a little bit of time right now understanding the why, and the why of the change, not just the why of certain processes. And then it starts to reveal the opportunities for us to change. So between step 1 and step 74, as you said, is a learning process for us as much as it is a learning process for our stakeholders, and then a learning process for the organization. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it reminds me of when I first got into coaching 4 or 5 years ago. I was going through the ICL process there, and it suddenly dawned on me that what we're doing when we talk to people about goals, i.e. objectives in the future of where they want to be, whether it be a learning team, whether it be professional development, whether it be career development, whatever it is, you first have to know where you are. You have to know where you're located on the map. And this map is obviously it's a metaphorical map, but it's a map of the landscape in which you occupy, the context in which you're in. And it's all well and good. Someone can give you a map and say, okay, I want you to get to point Z or Y, whatever it is. And it's great having that because you know where you want to go. But unless you know where you are, the navigation to that point is futile. That map is pointless, to be honest with you, because you may as well just head off and hope to get in the right direction. So that's what I was thinking when you were talking. It's great having that vision, that desire to want to improve, and all those great things which make people want to do the things, but you have to root them in a particular spot and a particular why, and then you can move forward from there. So that's what 100%. I took from what you were saying.
I mean, the way that I'll just show you quickly, the way that we do this in when we kick off, this is part of kind of our onboarding process. Well, I shouldn't be showing you that stuff. So we talk about it in 3 parts. This is kind of like the grow model, which is, where are you right now? Oh, hang on. Is my name in the way of that bottom corner?
It is, yeah.
Okay, let me zoom out a bit. Maybe that'll help. Okay, so we need to start with where we are now. That is a concrete, defined, square-looking reality, because we can be in contact with our reality. I call that now. Then we've got better, which is, a lot of people call goals. I don't like goals. The reason why I don't like goals is because it makes us too fixed and too focused and too definitive. So what we want to do is we want to talk about the direction we want to go, and then how are we going to get there. But what that looks like in practice is like this, where we need to focus on the direction and the speed of the change. So each now becomes the next better. And then that turns to the next one, and then that turns to the next one, and then that turns to the next one. And then slowly we realize that when we zoom out, we're moving in the right direction. The analogy, it's a limited one using the mapping one, is a little bit like a train network. where what we're doing is that we're building a track in the right direction, like the settlers in the US when they wanted to go from the East Coast to the West Coast. They knew where they were going to go, and they knew where they were going to hit the water at some point in time. And so they laid the tracks and they built the stations along the way. And it doesn't always go in a straight line. So I think that metaphor works beautifully for people. It also gives us permission to not have hit everything, every target, and knowing every answer and everything being perfectly measurable. We should be able to sit back and go, are we generally moving in the right direction? That should be the case for us as individuals, as professionals. That should be the case for us as a team, as a function accountable for all of the money. And there's lots of money that goes into health and safety functions. And then with our organizational stakeholders. So we should be able to talk to executive about the fact that we need to kind of get the vibe of our direction from an assurance point of view, not just like, is it red, green, or amber, and what's the overdue percentage of days and all this sort of stuff. That's where we get stuck.
The KPIs. Let's talk LTI KPIs.
Do you want to go there? I didn't mean
no.
That might be a distraction.
I swore. Apologies. Am I correct in saying as well, after your diagram, each now along the way is an iterative process. So it's almost like a restarting point. It's like, okay, we know what better in the future looks like, but we need to improve incrementally and iteratively along that process.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So if we take the example of step 1 to 74 of I want to do learning teams, because everyone's so bloody excited about that, we need to like slow down. Let's go back to step 1 and say so let's assume that we've talked about the why. The why is that the process right now isn't working. Let's assume that that's the why. So then we can ask the question and say, if there was only one change that we made to the process tomorrow for the incident tomorrow, what's it going to be? So what we do is we use this. Constraints are really, really good for humans because there's infinite numbers of possibilities. So we need to actually give ourselves framing and mental models to be able to limit our choices. Yep. We know from psychology that if you go into the supermarket and they're doing tasters of jam, jam or marmalade, if you're from the US, the more flavors available, the less likely it is that you'll actually buy a full jar of the stuff because our brain gets a little bit overloaded and it's difficult to decide. So
it's called decision paralysis, I think it is, isn't it?
That could be the name of it. I'm not sure, but the metaphor for people is to say, what's the one thing we're going to change about our process right now that's going to have the biggest impact? And so let's riff on that right now. We could actually go, well, let's break down the process of an incident investigation. Let's think about the immediate response and all of the reporting process and the actual human being in the center. So what if we shifted from a process-centric approach to a people-centric approach, which is, has this person got the care that they need? And everything revolves around that. That could be one thing that you do. You could also then say, okay, well, we make decisions about legal privilege. That's a really common one, especially for serious investigations in large organizations, where the learning process gets locked down by the lawyers. So we could say, well, what if we had more incidents that were not subject to legal privilege? And for some people, here's the trick, just don't tell the lawyers. Like, you are not accountable to the lawyers in your organization. Your job is to manage the risk. And if you think that there is more reward in the learning process than having it under legal privilege, then you do that. You're a professional. You can make the call on that, ask for forgiveness later. So, and then we could go, okay, well, what about interviews? So instead of having an interviewer who is one person who collects a linear series of disconnected fragments of a story, we assume that they have to be factually correct. And then we decide one version of the story, which is a total fallacy. There does not need to be one version. And then we represent that as a factual story. Well, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should get a group of people together and have a conversation and sense make the process, including where people might be holding back or not telling the truth or protecting their mates or whatever. So these are all little parts of the process we can start to change. That's way before we get to let's go and buy someone's book and go and do a training course and buy the t-shirt.
Right.
I'm really cynical. I just have to say, the reason why I'm cynical is because people come to me. I realize I work in this liminal space is because people come to me all the time and they say, we bought the book, we did the course, we, did a degree, we have a process, we bought the guru in and nothing has changed. What's going on? And I'm like, well, that's where we can live. We can live in that space.
I was literally, just before you jumped in there, I was literally just about to say, I'm sensing a little bit of cynicism from you there, Andrew.
But I don't.
But
I'm not trying. I'm totally not trying to be critical. Like, gurus have a place. Books and theories and training courses all have a place. The thing is, and I was reflecting on this in preparation for our conversation. I talk about working with professionals and professional practice. Like, that is. So if you search for hashtag professional practice, hashtag health and safety, that's my stuff on LinkedIn. The reason why I talk about professional practice is because I think we're missing a key definition of professional practice. So the Boffins will tell you that it has to do with a defined body of knowledge and a code of ethics to which people are held accountable, and pathways for certification that distinguish certified people from non-certified people, all this sort of stuff, right? That all has to do with limited liability as perceived by the general members of the public. When you go to a builder or an engineer, you want to make sure the thing doesn't fall down, right? So the society has said, we want to call those people professionals and we want to distinguish them from people who aren't. You with me so far?
yes.
The one thing that health and safety professionals don't have in the definition of professionals is that we actually improve health and safety.
Oh,
it's not there. So we can be entirely professional and have an entire career of saying, I was a professional and I met all of the requirements and I was a good person, but I didn't actually make a freaking difference.
In fact, you could have made it worse.
Well, yeah. So so the unintended side effects bit, I think, is an interesting one. Now, we could talk about unintended side effects in terms of the broader arc over many decades of health and safety. That might be a rabbit hole we don't want to go down. But the point being is that we have to hold ourselves accountable for actual change. Yep. So that's why I'm cynical, is because I'm always asking the question, okay, well, like, did anything change? People came to me, and this is like the New View stuff is classic. It's sexy. The gurus are very, very good at marketing it. That's why it's so successful. And the irony is that things like work as imagined and work as done is like over 100 years old as a concept. Human factors people have been doing this for a century. And we're not excited about human factors because human factors people are really rubbish at marketing. So,
it's been around too long. It's not new and flashy enough.
Human factors people aren't out there selling T-shirts and making books. They're out there doing the work. So, you look at things like, the very pithy but very, very useful metaphors. Things like the picture of the plane that came back with bullet holes in it in World War II. And people, I'll say this for the listeners in case they haven't heard it. So they mapped all the bullet holes in the wings, in the front,
Let's see if I can find it.
And if you can put it up, that'd be awesome. And so they looked at it and they said, well, wow, we need to reinforce those bits where all the bullets are going. And then some very clever human factors person said, actually, maybe the bits where there aren't bullets are from the planes that got shot and didn't come back. So it was a total inversion of the mental model that they were looking at of work as done. So that's an example of where you go, wow, that bloke, it was a bloke, that bloke saved pilots' lives in World War II because of that insight. So that's why I'm cynical, Dave. I know I'm carrying on a little bit because life is short. We don't have time to frig around. If we're serious about calling ourselves health and safety people, then we better be damn good at actually making change and being able to point to and claim the results of health and safety improvement.
Have you always had? Have you always had this kind of anti-establishmentarianism about you?
Am I sounding anti-establishmentarianism? Am I?
No, what you're doing is in my mind, because I agree with you to a degree, that if we, as a profession, and there are lots of artifacts for becoming a safety professional.
Yep.
And these artifacts, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying, these artifacts don't guarantee success in increasing safety. They are things that people can accumulate, whether it be training, whether it be education, whether it be time served, whether it be organizations you work for, whether it be how many posts, how many followers you have. There's a certain amount of prestige that can come with things that you can collect or things you can achieve, which in and of themselves, and correct me if I'm wrong here, in and of themselves, what you're saying is they don't actually guarantee that the house won't fall down, that the engine will keep on running, if we're going to go back to the metaphor of the architect and the internal combustion engineer.
Yep.
There isn't anything that guarantees. What does guarantee, in your mind, is is focusing more on the personal responsibility of the person in the organization to make sure there is betterment, regardless of all the artifacts that may come along with that, education, training, and all that kind of stuff. Are we taking personal responsibility for our actions within this context of the organization in order to improve safety?
Wow. That's a deep question. And I just want to pause on one word. When you talk about personal responsibility, I think what you're talking about is like as an individual, me and you, we're individuals. I like the word professional responsibility, because we're not an average Joe on the street or Jane on the street. Like, we are professionals, which means that we should be held to a different kind of standard. So it's really uncomfortable so in my first performance review, I started in a consulting role for a couple of years. I was going for breadth. That was my goal. I got breadth, and then I got really, really hungry for depth, for actual implementation change over time. So I dived into an organization in an in-house role, and then I realized how bloody hard that is. So it was a great learning experience. But that's actually where the rubber hits the road. In my first performance review, I remember sitting there, and my boss, amazing human being, really, really structured. And the first two line items on the performance review were, so I was a kind of like a business partner role. I floated around a number of different business units. And so I kind of had this combination matrix performance review of all of their results. First two line items, LTIFR and total recordable injury frequency rate. And I said, this is not appropriate. I said, it's not appropriate that I am held accountable. My performance is measured on the basis of those outcomes in those business units. So we had this awesome argument about that. And guess who won? He did. And so that was a really, now, I'm not saying that LTIFR and TRIFR are the things to measure that, but he was really clear on what my job was as a professional, and that the outcomes, not the outputs, the outcomes are the things, no, that's the other way. The outcomes are the things that we need to be held accountable for. So let's get excited about that. So instead of attacking lost time injury frequency rate, for example, as a thing, that's like falling in love with learning teams, except you're trying to get rid of something. Let's actually go, what is it for? Because in lots of organizations, the way that ESG is going and transparency and reporting standards, it's almost impossible. The horse has bolted on LTIFR. And the reason for that is because accounting standards and ESG transparency has already built it in. And so and that happened 5 years ago. So what happens now is in 15 years, we're still going to be using those reporting standards because ESG is going in that direction anyway. It's like, stop fighting it. Like, it's done. You've lost. What you haven't lost, though, necessarily is how they get used in your organization, what the dialogue sounds like around the use of that indicator, about how you might be able to say, well, this indicates this plus that, and then overall there's a story about how that data actually does two things, which is tells us something interesting, helps us make sense of the reality as close as we can get to it as executives. And then how does it inform our decisions? Like, that's the point of data and reporting. And so if you can reshape the story, and you can change the way that decisions are made without having to kill LTIFR in your organization. So stop getting stuck on it. I'm sorry. I'm taking this into directions. Hopefully I'm not too random.
No, I'm actually really enjoying it, because it's reminding me, I'm reading at the moment Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective People.
The original?
And I don't know which version it is. I don't know. I think I've got the book, and I also have the audiobook where his son adds documentary after each chapter as well. So
I was going to say the OG book is like 30 something years old, it's for mental models of change and professional growth. It's one of my go-tos. Absolutely. So tell me, what's jumped out at you about that?
So when you were talking then, what his and I can't remember which particular. I can't remember whether this was associated with a habit or whether he was just talking about a lot of the meta ideas which surround this. And I remember him saying, "Look, it's about, you have to bring it in. It's living in outwards, not letting things on the outside affect you. You deciding whether things around you affect you." Because in and of themselves, LTIs, whatever we're talking about in this context, they have no value. There is nothing about that which should affect you or create an emotive output in you as an individual. You
Yeah.
allow it to.
Yeah.
So when you were talking then about, okay, well, you've got these people, they want to have these learning teams, it's because they've created an emotional connection to that particular learning team without having first understood why they have that emotive connection to that particular output that they're looking for. And it's the same with LTIs as well. So you have the positive and negative effect of the internal and outward facing subjective world around you. So what you're doing, what I see you doing is you are the catalyst for, okay, you as a human being in your entity, in the context of the organization, and these things around you, why are they having the effect that they're having on you? And I know you use this as well. Well, I'm assuming you use as well in your one-on-one coaching as well, to try and find out why people are thinking the way they're thinking and what value they're getting from the things that are around them.
Yeah. 100%.
And the places that they want to get to.
Yep.
Is that, did I kind of get close to the mark there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I like to try and...
Sorry, I'll cut you off.
I like to try and give alternate perspectives to what people are talking about, because so that, people who may not have grasped what you're saying, if I can phrase it in a different way, then maybe they go, oh, okay, now I understand it.
Yeah,
but I didn't want to lose your meaning or your definition in the process of doing that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you holding up that mirror and reflecting it back for people. I also tend to talk really fast, which happens when I get excited.
That's all good.
I think you're on the mark there. We walk around as human beings, and we're always interacting with the world. So the philosophers talk about there's a difference between people who think that the world is just as it is, and then we are one object within that world and we're interacting with it, versus the social constructionists who say the world is actually created. So, we add meaning to the things that we build and create in the world. So, I think it was Margaret Mead, who is an anthropologist, and she says something really, really surprising about the development of human beings. When you look at like the historical, I was going to say not fossil record, but when they're digging up bones and icemen in Ukraine, and people preserved in salt, and Mungo Man is only a couple hundred k's from where I am. And she said it's not the development of tools, it's not civilization, it's certainly not agriculture or whatever. She said it's actually finding evidence of human beings who have had a broken femur, which is the top bone of your leg between your hip and your knee. It's the strongest
bone in the body, isn't it?
Biggest and strongest. Yep. And for most animals in the animal kingdom, you break your leg, you're dead.
Yep.
Because you will slow down the rest of the pack, you will attract predators, all that sort of stuff. And so she said one of the first signs of civilization for human beings was evidence from the fossil record of the femur being splintered. Where that group, that tribal nomadic group of people decided that this human being was worth more than the risk of all of those other things, of predators and being slowed down and having to carry them and using all that extra energy when calories were very scarce. That is civilization. So I think that I get goosebumps just telling that story, because that's the essence of what we're talking about here, which is what is our job today. And the problem that we have is when we start to open that up, it's a bit like caveman seeing fire for the first time. Imagine you went back 50,000 years and you can see cavemen,
wouldn't it?
With their flint trying to start the fire, right? And let's imagine that you had a Zippo in your pocket and you went psh, and the flame goes up. You can imagine the caveman going like that. Now we see the world in a way that we could not contemplate before that moment. Yeah. So if our eyes are open, and now that we're seeing that, we go through some stages of grief, which is that we have to let go of the way that the world used to be before we saw that. We also have to get comfortable with the discomfort of, oh, well, what do I do now? Because everywhere you look, you will see these problems. You will see the lack of why. You will see the misappropriation or the misunderstanding of the purpose of things. You will see stories that don't match the way that we behave. You will see the gaps between people's intentions or their values and action. We're going to see all of that stuff, and that's going to be really uncomfortable. So our job, once we start seeing the world anew, is to then decide, well, what's the few things I can do to make the biggest impact? And again, this is like the principles underlying all of this. You'll read it in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey talked about all of this. This is foundational stuff.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. And I've only just started delving into it now. But as you're talking now, I can tell, that it's influential to you because there's so many connections back to it with regards to, how we view the world and how we allow the world to affect us as well.
Yeah.
As you're talking as well, I'm thinking this is not just applicable to safety. This is applicable to, these are meta ideas you're talking about.
Yeah.
Do you deal with anybody in your consultancy and coaching and stuff like that who isn't a safety professional, but who just wants to better understand the world around them, especially in the context of an organization, and how they might be able to make betterment and improvement within those systems?
Yeah, very rarely.
Right.
And that's my choice. So these are universal things. My dad, I've interviewed him on my podcast. We did a 2-part episode because he's kind of a hero of mine. And there's lots of stories we can learn from him about his time as an executive leader working in government. And he said to me more often than I can remember, he said, because he's seen lots of consultants and coaches and facilitators or whatever come through his government work. And he says, you're not a safety person, Andrew. You're an organizational development person dressed up in safety clothes. Now, that it sounds a little bit like the sheep in wolf's clothing analogy, so I'm not super comfortable with that. But I've decided that I want to help health and safety people. And it's just turned out that the way that I help them is to almost never talk about health and safety stuff. That's the liminal space stuff. There are more than enough people who will teach you or write a book about learning teams or KPIs or whatever it is. So that's cool. Go and do the technical knowledge. We don't have a technical knowledge problem in health and safety. What we have is a change problem. And so that's where I choose to work. So yeah, I've spent time in organizations where sometimes I'll get referred on. I might start working with the health and safety team, and then in one organization, the head of safety started changing the way that they were operating. And then the CEO asked them to facilitate a different kind of dialogue with the executive team the executive team weren't working very well together. And so this head of safety said, well, no, firstly, because I'm one of the members of this team. You put me in a facilitator role and it changes my relationship here. And that's not good for the organization. But he said, the only reason why, not the only reason, one of the main reasons why I've changed is because of this guy, Andrew Barrett. So then I'll go and work with that executive team. They're kind of the few exceptions that will happen in. The point being is that as a marketer, as a person who seeks to make change in the world, because that's what good marketing actually is giving people what they need.
Yep.
Not selling them lemons. It's giving them what they need. And so I've just ended up working in using non-health and safety stuff in the world, and then working out how to create the metaphors and images and frameworks and models and processes to be able to direct that into and inject that into the health and safety people that I work with. Does that make sense?
It does. And I really like that, because what you're effectively doing is you're decentralizing safety from its own siloed profession, as it were, and you're integrating it into the rest of the organization. Maybe not.
That might be really generous. I'm not sure.
I
think conceptually I'm doing that, but conceptually is very different from practically.
Yes. Yeah. Practically, you're Andrew Barrett, safety on tap, safety is your world, but you're not just operating within the safety sphere. You're operating within a holistic, organizational, psychological, and personal change environment. Yeah. Now that's ubiquitous to the entire organization, not just to the safety.
It could do.
So
I'm just trying to direct my focus, because there's a amazing guy, motivational speaker, that if the audience listens to him, 50% of them are going to get really turned off, and 50% of them are going to fall in love with him. His name's Zig Ziglar. He's dead now, and apart from being a little bit politically incorrect in some of the things that he said, because he worked in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s in the US, and he's a white male, and he's from the South. So already people might have a picture of him in their mind. But he said, if you can help everyone, then you're going to help no one. Instead of being a wandering generality, how about you be a meaningful specific? So that's kind of what Zig used to talk about. And so I'm really, really clear on who I'm trying to help. I can help lots of people, but I'm just really clear on helping a certain type of person.
Gotcha.
Now, the interesting bit about that is that there's also this part about change that is quite emergent. So in the last 5 years, psychosocial risk management, at least in Australia and New Zealand, has started to get much more attention. The big trigger for anyone who like whinges about compliance and whatever, the big trigger for the change was new laws. So let's just take that in for a minute. So new laws come in, everyone's talking about psychosocial risk management. Most health and safety professionals really uncomfortable and kind of incompetent in that space. That's not a criticism, that's a reality. So then we've got to go, well, what are we going to do next? So this is happening in one client of mine. I mean, it's happening in all of them, but one in particular. And they're scratching their heads saying, how are we going to do this? They work in construction. And so like they've got an audience, a kind of psychographic and demographic of the people they're working with, as well as a supply chain that's a bit disconnected where they're going like, oh, how are we going to do this? And so what we did is we said, well, let's not do it deliberately. Let's do it inadvertently or kind of as a pleasant side effect. So we said, what's the number one thing that's going to get people interested in construction about a change you want to make, which is build better stuff, build it quicker, build it faster, build it safer, build it cheaper. So let's make projects work better. And it turns out that when you look at the research, there's huge alignment between the success factors of big projects in particular, like big infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, rail, that sort of stuff, and psychosocial risk management. So the quality of the relationship between the contractor and the client is one of the biggest predictors of success of a project. The alignment on goals and values, the ability to resolve problems and conflicts. It's like no brainer, but when you sell it as saying we're going to improve the work, then you actually get the pleasant side effects of your psychosocial risk management along the way. Now, it's not perfect alignment, but it's, again, they're taking one step in the direction they want to go. They're treating it like an experiment, and it's early days, but it's showing some really interesting results about how the whole supply chain starts to revolve around that goal of collaborating together for success. And work gets better. People get less stressed. People are more satisfied with their work. Working hours get resolved quicker because resource imbalances, are normally talked about instead of work harder, stay later, don't complain. Which is so. What was my point? My point there was that we were getting psychosocial risk management benefits by making work better. So we just changed the lens, the perspective, but they're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, right. Okay. And I was always aware of safety being a side effect of human organization performance, of improving systems and making things more efficient and effective. Safety automatically becomes a side effect of that. I hadn't made the connection that you just made for me there. It also improves the psychosocial aspects of that as well. Because in order to have the better communications, I mean, you actually reducing the and I don't want to say conflict, because I personally believe conflict is valuable as long as it's had in the correct way with the correct intent. But when you improve that communication between the contractors and the prime as well, you're actually improving psychosocial hazards as well in the workplace. You're improving work design because you want it to get done quicker. You're improving the resourcing and the time people have to spend because you want the job to be done cheaper. All these things might align, as you point out, to actually improve everything along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Two things that you've brought up for me, which is awesome. I love the way that this conversation's unfolding. The first one is just really quickly on conflict. There's a difference between disagreement and conflict. The word conflict comes from the Latin word conflictus, which means the clashing of swords. So you can have a disagreement, but that doesn't mean that you pull your pistols out and start dueling, right? So there's a difference between those two things. So I agree with you. Disagreement is value. Conflict at that point in time, the relationship has started to break down. So when the swords come out, when the clashing of swords is happening, you've already lost a lot of opportunity in the value of the disagreement. Because at that point in time, what happens when two people pull swords out? What's the logical end point?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have to resolve that, then you've obviously gone too far. But we made these kind of semantic kind of warfare bit here because I did a little bit of research. I wrote a podcast, a post on this, which was constructive conflict and destructive conflict, which is essentially the same kind of thing you're talking about here.
Yeah.
And it's more to do with the systems. We can have constructive conflict about the systems and about whether we think they're working and how to improve them. We have destructive conflict, interpersonal destructive conflict.
Yeah.
So that's when two people start pulling out their swords or, and their pistols, 10 paces, turn around and bang, 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 kind of thing. But I agree with you there. And it's strange, isn't it? Because as soon as the psychosocial hazard aspect came out here in Australia, people said, "Oh, well, we can't argue. We can't have those. We can't have those disagreements because that's not psychosocial. That's not psychologically safe in the workplace. That's not psycho safety." And it's like, okay, well, let's bring it back. Let's take a breath and let's actually review what it is, because they're jumping at, to your point again, they're jumping from point A to point Z without reviewing what's in the middle and reviewing, okay, what's the intent and what's the value that can be had from these things as well. And all these ideas, they're meta ideas along the way, value and intent, they're important questions and they're important aspects of everything that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Right,
I think, sorry, I don't mean to disagree, but I am going to disagree with you just about the language. So let's think again. I'm going to
pull out my pistol and I'm going to.
No. But this is the good bit. This is that you and I are smiling, and yet we're not on the same page. So this is a really, really good insight. The word conflict is a problem. So let's say that we need to work with health and safety professionals who want to generate better learning in their organization, because that's kind of where our conversation started. One of the sources of learning is increasing diversity of perspective. So if I'm saying that, people are nodding with me. Yeah, Andrew, you're making lots of sense. And then I'll say, would you like to go down the path of getting better at increasing diversity of perspective? And they're nodding and they're nodding. And then I'm like, right, now I'm going to teach you how to have more conflict. Right? And the nodding stops. The thing is that humans don't like conflict. So I think the language really does matter. If we actually say we're going to increase diverse perspectives, we're going to allow for multiple perspectives to exist at the same time. We're going to have difficult conversations with people. They're all kind of synonyms for what we're talking about at the front end before the swords come out. But I think the language matters. So if conflict is something people want to run away from, what we want people to do is to run towards disagreement so that it doesn't turn into conflict. So I appreciate that you've distinguished those two things. I still don't think the word conflict is a constructive one in the constructive way that you've described it.
Yeah, right. Isn't that bizarre? Because I was in a co-coaching conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually the coach. There was a coachee, and then there was an observer that actually turned their camera off and all that kind of stuff. And I was talking to this guy. Anyway, the word sacrifice was used. I was saying to him, what are you prepared to sacrifice in order to be able to attain your goal? Now that's my language, and it just happened to land with him, and he's like, "Oh, I understand what you mean. You mean, what am I prepared to give up in order to be able to attain what I've told you that I want to attain?" And it landed with him, and he was really happy with it, and it really clicked with him. The observer came back in the room afterwards to give their feedback, and she said, "I really didn't like that word sacrifice. For me, that brought up a lot of death, and it brought up, people being mutilated or whatever it was." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. If I'd have used that with you, hopefully you would have said this, and I would have been able to change my language in order to better suit."
You would have noticed.
Yeah. So the reason I'm telling you this story is because maybe we're both right, and I'm trying to find the middle ground here. It just depends who we're talking to. If someone is perfectly happy with hearing the word conflict and having their perceptions of the word shifted to be, okay, I wasn't aware that there was constructive conflict. I like that because, or, okay, we don't like the word conflict. And what about, sorry, what was the word you used?
Difficult conversations, disagreement, multiple
disagreement.
Yeah,
disagreement. And they go, okay, well, I can get behind disagreement. So maybe the value isn't in what we're saying; it's in how it's being heard.
Yeah, 100%.
But I agree.
And the great irony here, the meta insight for the listeners or the viewers here is that you and I right now don't need to resolve that. So we agree that there are multiple perspectives on this thing, and the insight, the learning, the benefit for them is pay attention to how the words are landing with people. So I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And oh, look, we've got a few minutes here. I really wanted to get some insight from you as to how you go about engaging organizations to get the feedback. And I know we've only got 5-10 minutes left, and you've got a lot of busy day today. It's your wife's birthday, so I don't want to keep you too long.
Yeah.
But could you give the audience some ideas, as to how organizations that you've worked with have gone forward to actually learn from their front line and how that landed?
Okay. So the vast majority of people who seek to learn from the front line fail to do so. And the reason why they fail to do so is because they try and introduce new things and they don't actually deal with the old things. And I know that some people don't like that language, but let's just talk about the new thing and the status quo. Yep. That's the reason why it's really, really difficult. There's also another really important, if you take a systems thinking lens, which is really what we're doing here, is we're just talking about, well, what parts interact with each other in order to create certain outcomes. And so if we talk about things going wrong, as opposed to things going well, not right, which is what Eric Holdnagel always clarifies, then it's really clear in our organizations what the trigger for a learning process is when something goes wrong. Because there's like blood on the floor, or the ambulance is there, or it meets a certain criteria for the thing falling out of the sky or whatever.
Yep.
It's black. It's pretty black and white. Organizations are getting much better, even for near misses and that sort of stuff, or high potentials. So what's the trigger for when nothing is going wrong and we want to learn from normal work? And then people kind of scratch their head. There is an infinite number of triggers for a person like you and I inside an organization to look at each other and go, time to learn, time to do the work insight, time to start a learning team, time to have that appreciative inquiry, time to engage in humble inquiry with the senior leadership walk. So what the trigger is the critical thing that people are often missing. It's the elephant in the room. There's a reason why there's an elephant on my wall. It's because there's always an elephant in the room, and it's right in front of you, which is that if your process will be useless unless you think about what the trigger for your process is. So I think that's kind of the first one. Organizations that do this well figure out triggers.
Why? They're why?
Well, actually, it's not why. It's a what question. So Bernice McCarthy is an educator who came up with what's called the format model, which is number 4 MAT. And it talks about the different kinds of questions people ask in their mind. And people tend to lean towards certain parts of this. There's 4 questions: why, what, how, and what if, which is kind of like the black hat objections and future focused people. So it's actually not a why question. The trigger is a how question. So how are we going to do work insights when we've got a really busy, construction company? Well, we have to come up with triggers so that people know that these are the sorts of things that will trigger a work insight. So it's a how question, not a why question. Because the why question is, well, we're not learning from normal work. We're not appreciating our workers. We're not planning well. We're not managing interface. They're all why questions. But the trigger is a how question. Okay.
And if we move on from the how question, what to potentially a what question, so we can leave people with some concrete things that have worked, that you've seen them work.
Yeah.
So they've got the how question. How do they then transfer that into a what? What do they do in order to be able to then learn that thing, depending on how and why they decided to learn?
Yeah. So you need the what. So generally speaking, it goes in that order: why, what, how, and then what if. So you need to have the what before the how. Okay. So you need to actually say, well, what are we talking about? Because if you want to do a learning team in an organization like consulting engineering, where everything is measured by the hour, then you're going to fail before you've begun, because you want to put people into a room where you don't have an accounting budgeting process to allocate their time. So you might have the what, but then the how falls down. So the best kinds of hows that I have seen for organizations who do learning from work as done is they start small. They start with a very, very micro process like conversations, or something like a work insight. That's a popular one. Lots of people have heard about them, which is a deliberate exploration of work as done for a reason. So it's not for a KPI. It's for a reason, a critical risk or a stage at a project or a new person coming on board. And there's a little bit of structure that goes a really, really long way. So the little bit of structure sounds like, instead of going out there with a checklist, this is not going to be surprising, you go out there with questions. You train people and you get them comfortable with the idea that they don't need to fix anything in the conversation, because the process of learning itself with another human being is super rewarding and valuable. So the best kind of interaction you can have with other people is, or best kind of interview, it doesn't matter, is where you ask one question and then it just flows. Now, you might need a few more questions up your sleeve, but if you talk to a worker about work as done, and they know why you're having the conversation and your intent is to be helpful, as Edgar Schein would say, then you need very few questions in order to learn from work as done. The last bit about why organizations who've done it well, about what makes them successful, is that they close the loop.
Right.
So you don't just generate the front-end learning and front-end process. You actually show people that you learn and you make change, you make things better as a result of that. So if people talk about poor tools or not enough time or conflict or whatever, that they see that some action gets taken on that. So again, not complicated. It's hard work, but it's not complicated.
So that's the integrity piece, isn't it? That's a look, you've told us, we said we'll do something about it, then we're going to go and do something about it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So here's an interesting thing about that loop. You say it in a way that it makes so much sense to people. And again, people will be nodding. But we've got corrective actions registers and systems spitting out things that are drowning our operations people. The problem is the volume. So don't go and do anything until you've sorted out the volume problem of corrective actions in your organization. So you've actually got to then go, well, what part of that puzzle do we need to better understand? And I'm sorry to say to the people who love systems out there, part of the solution is not bureaucratizing so much of the action-making process. Yeah. The number one indicator of a successful work as done interaction with a frontline worker is two questions, which is, how did it feel? My hand's there. How did it feel? And did anything change? That's it. Oh, I don't know why those balloons popped up. How did it feel? And did anything? Yeah, it's a Mac thing. I haven't worked out the settings for it. So, because the worker is the only source of data on successful interactions about work as done that we need to look at. So forget the number of actions, forget the number that's done, forget whether they're tied to critical risks. Just ask that. And the funny thing is that zero organizations are actually doing that. Getting data from the actual workers. Yeah. And it's not complicated. They're all there. It's really easy.
But it's not written down, it's not proceduralized, it's not systemized. It's a conversation. And I've spoken to so many people and they go, okay, I need to have a conversation. Okay, well, give me a list of questions you want me to ask. And it's like, no. No. Go and talk to the person. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why I actually quite like the 4Ds, because they provide a loose framework for actually starting those types of conversations. Tell us what we're asking. Tell us what's dumb. Tell us what we're asking you to do that doesn't make sense. Or something along those lines. And then a good starting point.
If we go back to this, so this is the format model. So again, format, I'll just draw it up quickly because people might like it. So there's why parts, there's what parts, there's how parts, which is time and who and where and all that sort of stuff. And then there's the what if parts. Now, what you've just said is people get stuck on the how part, which is give me the questions. Yep. You can actually design an entire process, which is just on the why and the what. We're going to do work insights. Work insights are short conversations with workers where you're specific and intentional about why you're having a conversation with them. So when you have a process that is just why and what, but you don't tell them any how, guess what happens? They figure it out because it puts you on the hook to clearly articulate the why. And then they're going to be a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning with the how. But my experience has been with the organizations I work with, when they're light on the how, but they're really, really heavy on the why, then guess what? Clever people figure it out and things get better as a result.
They do. All right. As always, and for the people here in Australia, they'll already know, I had Andrew Barrett on at the Safety Differently Book Club here in Perth. Was it last year or the year? I think it was last year, wasn't it? Last year. And it was an amazing day. And if he's ever in Perth again, it'd be a pleasure to have you again, Andrew. But as always, conversation, just gets my mind racing in so many different directions and making connections here, there, and everywhere. And it's a pleasure to get you on the channel and to speak. And thank you so much for coming on. Before we disappear, I would like to show everybody, if you've been listening to the talk and you like what Andrew has to say and you want to learn more, is a little bit of a plug, which I know we'll keep really brief. But here is Andrew's website. You can go to safetyontap.com. Introduction to Andrew, link to his podcast. So how many guests have you had on there now? It must be hundreds now, isn't it?
Episodes is hundreds. I tend to have conversations with some people, and then I tend to share some personal reflections as well in shorter format. So I don't know how many guests off the top, a few hundred. Yeah.
Lots and lots. So you can go here, you can listen, you can request to be a guest as well. You can get in contact with Andrew, have a look at some of the clients he's been working with, learn a bit more about some of the things we've been talking about today. There's a contact. Is there somewhere where people can contact you directly?
Yeah, those buttons down the bottom, you can get in contact with me.
Okay. Learn more, get clarity. Buttons, what, down here? Sorry, am I missing something?
Those big square blue things.
Oh, all right, okay. There you go. A bit of human factors there, mate. A bit of human factors there.
LinkedIn's also a good place to get in touch with me.
There we go. Well, let's do that then. Let's just quickly show people. Stop screen. Still learning this new technology, which is always good. I like to learn new things. But Andrew Barrett. Here's Andrew's LinkedIn page. Find him on there. Andrew, Barrett. Reach out to him, connect, have conversations with him as well. He'd be more than happy to share, I'm sure, anything that he's currently working on and insights that he gets. And that's where you contact him as well to find out if he can come and help you in your organization. Do you serve clients outside of Australia as well, Andrew?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you could hang around just while I say goodbye, and I'll drop you down. But it's been a pleasure to have you on. I don't know, it's $50 in my account yet.
I just wanted to say thank you to you, David. I think that it's really easy for people to these days get on their phone and do a search for something and find a topic and some content that's really helpful and relevant for them. I think that ease of access actually kind of obscures just how much hard work and commitment goes into being so generous and being so organized with what you do. So on behalf of your audience, I wanted to say thank you for your work because it makes a difference.
No, hey, it's all people like you inspired me to do this as well with your podcast and the way you share information and the way, that you want to educate and, help widen people's perspectives. So,
and here we are.
Here we are together. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure. If you could hang around, that would be awesome. I just want to say goodbye personally at the end.
Thanks,
but I'll just drop you down now. And that was Andrew Barrett brought to everybody. I think you'll agree that we could have gone on for a lot longer, talking about lots of nuanced, interconnected ideas and how they work and some of the best ways in which you can talk to your frontline or anybody within your organization. Really start with the why. Start with what is it you're trying to achieve? What's the value you're trying to gain? What's the intent behind what you're trying to do? All these big meta ideas that we talk about occasionally on the channel, this is where you want to start. Don't just go after something because you've heard it from somewhere. It's the new best shiny thing, which likely isn't. It's probably a rehash of something that's been working for a very long time, which is fine. But start to do the work. Start back at square one and start to fill in those blanks, as Andrew said, and to figure out why you want to do it and what kind of changes you're looking to make, and what that might look like for you as an organization. Because every single organization is going to be different. You've got different contexts, different people, different processes, different language, different cultures. Everything's going to be different. So do the hard work at the beginning, and then hopefully some of these ideas that you're looking at, they'll have firmer ground in which to take hold. So thank you everyone for watching and subscribing. Very much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Take care, everyone.